I found a dead girl when I was 12. Reddit. What are your unforgettably creepy moments? I saw the aftermath of what happens when a 350-pound man jumps out a 20-story window. It does not look like what they show on TV. I'm not sure what they show on TV, but was it better or worse? Even though that's relative. When I was 12 years old, my friends and I were riding our bikes through some woods down an old dirt road that wasn't much used anymore. I decided it would be cool for me to go off-road and rode off the road into the forest. I got about 50 feet before I got disoriented and started going towards the creek, which was in a dell down a steep hill from there. Something else I didn't know. So I crashed down the hill and hit this huge boulder collection before coming to a rest. While I was sitting there, off towards the road, I could hear my friends calling to me, so I knew which way to go. I started over towards their voices and saw a super old rusted out car. I was a huge license plate collector back then, and finding rusted out cars in the woods was not that odd of an occurrence. So I went to see if I could harvest the license plate. When I got there, I saw there were bones in the front seat and a pile of rags. It was full on Raiders of the Lost Ark with a skeleton on a pike kind of thing. I screamed like a little girl and got the heck out of there. I told my parents later, who called the police, and after some investigation determined that the man had disappeared during a blizzard in the late 50s and was never heard from again. I met his widow and children and won an award from the town. I'll never forget that feeling. Creepy as heck. This occurred in 1981. He had been missing 20 plus years at that point. I am now 43 years old. I have no long-term effects from this event. I remember it. Remember being scared at the time and then completely puzzled as to why finding something by accident and then telling my parents about it was such a big deal. I went in the basement and looked in the box where I thought that certificate might have been, but it wasn't there. My mom might have had it. I'll ask my sister if she's seen it. No, I didn't get the license plate. My friends and I went back after all the dust had died down and they had pulled the car out. I've not been back there in decades. I decided it would be cool for me to go off-road and rode off the road into the forest. You have no idea how long it took my brain to comprehend that story. More traumatic than creepy, but saw the immediate aftermath of a kid run over by the school bus next to the one I was on. It was a cold morning and there was steam coming off the body. I remember that and the spilled lunchbox. This is why they have sweeper bars on the front of buses now, to make sure kids walk far enough in front of the bus that the driver can see them. I have a young daughter now and these are the things that keep me up at night. When I was in primary school, 6 or 7 year old, while lined up waiting for the bus to arrive, one of my classmates who was tossing a ball up in the air and catching it missed the catch and ran after the ball and was struck by the bus that was coming to pick us up. The front wheel crushed her skull. This happened about 10 feet from me. I saw her brain literally pop out of her head. God, that must have ruined the bus driver's life too. Saw a dead guy pulled out of a creek on my parents' property when I was 16. He flipped his truck while high drunk and trespassing. He decided to leave when the cops were called on him. He didn't make the turn onto the bridge and it flipped his truck into the creek. He broke his neck upon impact. A bunch of guys tried to get him out but the mud was suctioning him down. When the EMTs and police showed up, they got him out but he was bloated and white by that time. They put him on the rescue sled to pull him up the bank. His bloated, white head was bobbing because of his broken neck. That image is burned into my brain. His bloated, white head was bobbing because of his broken neck. My god, that is absolutely horrifying. The rest of the story is as standard as those kinds of situations get, but that one sentence makes it so much worse. I hope that seeing that had no adverse effects on you, and I hope enough time has passed for you not to be mentally thrown back to that time in your everyday life. I used to live in a funeral home. Literally in a funeral home. My parents owned it, but we didn't have enough income to really support a home for ourselves. So we took part of the building and kind of converted it into an apartment. Due to some pretty bad planning on my parents' part, we had the living room like right next to the area where we kept the bodies, which was right next to the embalming room. Basically every day I'd see a random naked dead guy or two sitting on a table right outside where I was playing. Sometimes my dad would be working in the embalming room. You know what I mean by working. And since there were pretty big windows on the door, God knows why, I would get to see almost everything. From a guy getting stabbed and having his blood let out, to the egregious stitching that would have to be done to guys coming from the morgue. But as Canex was getting at, all this stuff isn't really that bad. I mean, you don't really know any of the people that you see dead, so there's no real psychological impact on you. The only scary thing is when friends of the family get sent to the funeral home. That could put a man in the mental clinic. I grew up near San Francisco, and for my 5th birthday I wanted to walk the Golden Gate Bridge for the first time. About halfway through, a guy climbed over the guide rail and jumped. I had no idea what it meant at that age, but I still remember almost everything about that day. Where we had parked, what I was wearing, the weather, everything. My grandma ended up picking up his wallet he left for someone to find and turning it into the police. It was still warm from being in his pocket. Whoa, you know the SF Gate stopped reporting how many jumpers per year decades ago because people were trying to be the 500th, 1000th, etc. I don't know if this would be too difficult for you to watch, but there is a really well done documentary about people who jump from Golden Gate called The Bridge. Lake Erie in Ohio. My family and I were swimming in it as it was the closest thing to a beach we had. I felt something touch my leg and I just assumed it was seaweed or a fish. Then my stepfather felt something touch his leg. I was underwater briefly when he felt it touch him. He looked at me when I came up and his eyes were wide and afraid. He asked me if it was me and I assured him it wasn't. At that moment he realized it was a body. He was holding my 3-year-old little brother, his son. We were maybe 4 feet deep at the time and I was struggling to swim and was maybe still 8-10 feet away from him. With his right arm he held my little brother and with his left arm he unsubmerged a 7-year-old boy from the darkness of the Great Lakes. He had faced my little brother away so he wasn't subjected to the sight of the dead boy. He carried them both about 30-40 feet shore before screaming for my mother to come and take my little brother. It was horrific. Moments later the boy's family is running towards us and I will never forget the screams of the mother who had left responsibility with her 17-year-old son to take care of his little brother. There was a nearby nurse who tried to perform CPR to no avail. His brother lost sight of him only 15 minutes earlier. His mother started beating the crap out of him while she was crying and screaming in Spanish. It was in the newspaper and although it matters little, the lifeguards on the beach were given full credit for recovering the boy. My stepfather was not mentioned. I was 13 on that day and will never forget the little boy or the sounds of his mother. Just writing this made my eyes swell. Additional information. It was Mentor on the lake and it happened in the summer of 99 or 00. The last name was Latino. I have been trying to find the article on Google but I can't. I would really appreciate it if anybody could locate it. My mother no longer has the newspaper article. Thanks for the consolation. I wish the mother could receive these kind words. I remember hearing about a lawsuit for the lack of sufficient lifeguards or something. If that helps you locate it, I will read some of your kind words to my stepfather. This makes me sad, especially for the boy who had the responsibility of watching him. You know that'll hang over him for the rest of his life, and that his parents will blame him to some extent. Just sad. On another note, I'm freaking terrified of swimming in lakes because I always imagine this sort of scenario happening. I was present at an armed robbery when I was 10 and had to hide in the shed. I saw everything. It was horrible. It was 2 doors down from my house. I made my mum buy all sorts of locks and security stuff after that. Right on. Appropriate reaction. Indirectly, having to handle my mother's corpse until the ambulance arrived to pronounce her dead. It was unpleasant, obviously, in and of itself. Seeing that rigor mortis had set in and the chest compressions were clearly a futile effort, but that's not the thing that gets me. What gets me is that every so often I rub my arms when they are cold and the skin feels just enough like her body that I'm taken back in an instant. No warning. No consistency. It gets unpleasant in winter. Oh man, that's awful. I empathize with you though. When my dad passed, we waited in the hospital room with his body for 3 hours until my sister could get there and break the news. We sat there watching him turn blue purple, and the awful death stench slowly creeping in. Chilling. Haunting. Something I sincerely hope no one ever has to experience again. A few months ago I came home from work and found my mom lying dead on the floor from an overdose. I'll never get the image of those purple feet out of my head. I'm sorry. When I was learning to drive, my father would accompany me. There was a football game in town that the rest of my family was at, but I was not going for some reason. On my way home, and into my neighborhood, fairly large neighborhood, we went past a plain white van that was off. It turned on and followed us all the way to the road that my house is on. It went to the cul-de-sac. My father took the truck to the game, leaving no vehicles in the parking area and myself alone at home. That white van decided to pull into my driveway, so I ran into my father's closet, grabbed the 16 gauge shotgun, 2 shells, and walked out onto my front porch with it drawn at the van. That van went into reverse and backed out of my driveway faster than it came in. It was a very strange experience and I sat on my porch for a good 30 minutes before going back inside for the night. TLDR. Plain white van followed me home. There's some plumber out there that tells a story about the time he accidentally pulled into the wrong driveway and almost got shot by a teenager. I was 15 and I was playing in a tennis tournament. It was a typical hot summer. Another player who must have been in his 40s was serving. He tossed the serve up in the air and then collapsed on the hard court. I rushed over to help and started CPR with his friend. We took turns until the ambulance came, which was about 15 minutes, but it seemed like hours. The EMTs took over the CPR and tried to resuscitate him with injections and defibrillators to no avail. They pronounced him dead on the tennis court. I had to continue my match after they moved the body off of the courts. My hands kept shaking, so I forfeited the match and sat under a nearby tree just staring into space. His friend came back to find me near the courts to thank me. He told me about his friend, about his life, and his family. Strangely, that made me feel better. I learned from that day how precious life is and how it can all change in an instant. She was gone that afternoon. I'm sorry, but this is bugging the heck out of me. Did you go back and she was gone? Does this mean her killer is possibly still at large since no authorities were involved? I can't imagine that the police just taking the body and leaving no evidence of an investigation in less than a day. My neighbor didn't pick up his kid from school one day, so I had to break into his house. I found him on the basement floor with no clothes on. I could tell he was still alive, but obviously there was brain damage as he couldn't form words or even move. I later found out he had a brain aneurysm, and he had no clothes on cause it happened while he was masturbating. What an inconvenient time. On a date at the beach, body washes up on shore. Let's turn this date into a threesome. I was working at an ice cream shop when I was in high school, and at night in the winter it would only be me and another manager. It was in a pretty nice area, and behind the store there was a giant park that got really creepy at night. That night the manager was a girl, like myself, not too much older than me, and when we are closing we have to do trash. We were both pretty small, but we could easily do it by ourselves. I decided to take the trash out at night because she was counting money. So I get all the bags out and I walk outside, and in the parking lot next to the trash there is a man standing there. He was wearing sweats and there was just this look of hatred on his face that I've never seen in anybody before. I ran back in, locked the doors to be safe, and did some dishes thinking that I could do the trash later. I walked into the main room of the store where there are all the windows, and he was standing there in the window, just looking in, and I will never forget the smile that came on his face when he saw me again. It was the worst mix of evil and complete joy. I can't even describe how his eyes were. They were filled with hate, a hate that I've never seen on anybody before. I ran into the back room with my manager and we hid there for what felt like 2 hours until the police came. By then he was gone. However, he was arrested a few weeks later for brutally violating and killing a female girl, my stature and hair color. Maybe it's just cause I'm a girl, but this story is the creepiest one in this thread. In the 4th grade, a dude hung himself outside our school. They made us draw pictures about the guy as an assignment that morning for some reason. I remember the teachers saying something like, if only that guy could see what we're doing for him now, maybe he wouldn't have killed himself. I don't think the guy even had any connection to the school or anyone in it, just someone that wanted to die. I don't remember what I drew, but I remember one kid's drawing. He drew a before frame where the dude was happy, then an after frame where he killed himself, then a why after frame where death was saying welcome to heck. If only that guy could see what we're doing for him now, maybe he wouldn't have killed himself. What? I was flying to India and we had just stopped in Germany. I was 14 and sitting next to this old guy who either was asleep the whole time. I shack him because we landed because he was kinda laying me. No response. I was an unaccompanied minor, so when the stewardess came to get me she looked at him, checked his pulse, and then everyone was ordered to stay where they were, including me. The paramedics came and declared him dead. I never knew for how long. I had never seen a dead guy up close before and was surprised at the time. I thought he would smell of something rotten when he died or would make a noise or something beforehand. To this day I always think if I had noticed earlier I could have helped him. I also had a dead guy lay on my shoulders for 8 hours, and I fell asleep during that flight as well, so there was a good chance I used his head as a pillow while I slept. Creepy, but that's life. If he died silently on a long flight, I'm willing to put big money on him dying of a massive pulmonary embolism. When a big one of those hits, you die, period. Even if it happened in the hospital in front of a team of doctors, he'd still be dead. By not noticing, all you did was preserve his dignity and death. When I was 18 and invincible, I drove down to local place where teenagers and creepers hung out with a couple of my friends. A few minutes into the ride, one of my friends gets a call to pick some dude up to go as well, but they were arguing about it not being safe for him. He was also young and invincible, so he persuaded her to let him come, and I picked him up. In the car, they started arguing again and I found out that he got some skeevy gang leader dude's sister pregnant and ran out on her and he had a hit on him. I didn't take this seriously because we lived in a place with 70k people. Well, when we got there, we took a couple laps around the cruising, and he was attracting attention, so I went to park. No sooner did he get out of the car than 5 cars surrounded mine. A dozen or so people bolted out and beat the ever-living crap out of him with wooden and metal baseball bats. He ran around screeching, trying to hide on the various sides of my car while we were forced back inside to witness. Within probably 2 minutes, it felt like days, the cops came and the people with bats fled and we were just left sitting there in shock while he lay, dented, on my, also dented, car bleeding against the white paint. I have no idea if he lived or died, but they shut down cruising after that and I really dislike the sounds of bats hitting things. Can't watch mobster movies. They always seem to want to whack people with bats. See, it was the day I realized that I'm not invincible and I needed a new set of friends. I saw what happens to the human body when you are burned alive. Suicide bomber detonated his car on a crowded street, killing several civilians including children. The burned bodies of children curled in fetal positions is probably the worst of a large number of horrible things I've seen humans do to each other. Not creepy, but I found my friend's dead body after he had pulled the trigger. Well, actually ended well, but really stuck with me. This summer I was working as a nanny, my charges, and I went to Bethesda pool a few times a week. One day, the older girl, 11, saw something at the bottom in the shallower end, brought it to my attention, and when I went over to check it out, it was a little boy, maybe 6, all curled up into the fetal position. When I reached in to pull him out, he was completely limp in my arms and he wasn't breathing. I brought him to the side where some lifeguards, who didn't notice him even though there was no one anywhere near him obstructing the view of the bottom, and didn't even notice me yelling for them until I got to the side of the pool and lifted him up onto the concrete, gave him CPR, called the paramedics, etc. I put on a brave face for the girls, but I thought he was dead for sure until later when the cops let me know he wasn't. Thankfully this is a pretty happy story, but the image of his body curled up on the bottom of the pool and the feel of his body limp in my arms just stuck with me for some reason. You saved a life. Once when I was like 10 years old, my dad was unemployed and we were struggling for a few months financially, and some kid in school called me a broke bastard over something I don't even remember, and he told me to buy some decent clothes and that I looked like a hobo. It wasn't that bad, he was just saying crap to hurt me. That really struck a nerve, so after school I walked up to him while he was sitting on his bike and I punched him so hard on the side of his head that blood starting coming out of his nose and his left eye turned red. He screamed, "Oh my god, I can't see." I just felt sick to my stomach and felt like a monster. I just wanted to disappear that moment, but he was fine after a few minutes. I bet he didn't call you a hobo after that. You see, things like this are why I am constantly afraid that I am going to stumble upon a dead body. I work at an emergency vet clinic, We see some fricked up things, but you get desensitized after a while. There are some things, however, that stick with you. I was working front desk overnight one night. It was about 3 AM and nothing was going on. I see a car fly into the lot. The driver almost drove through our front bay window. An older lady gets out and comes running in, screaming hysterically and holding something wrapped in a towel and dripping blood. She came up to the counter, set it down, and unwrapped it. It was a young kitten cut completely in half. A very clean cut. Absolutely the most disturbing thing I've seen at work. My doctor on staff and I calmed her down as best as we could and drove her home. The next day we got in touch with her again. Turns out her drunk husband got pee at her and killed her kitten. He was charged and did time for animal cruelty and assault on his wife. He beat her the same night. TLDR. Kitten cut in half. Yeah, my job is hard. This particular night was the worst. But someone has to do it. No, I don't think she expected us to glue it back together. I think she was so distraught that she had no idea what else to do. We cremated the kitten for her free of charge. I picked out a really pretty urn for her and delivered the ashes to her about a week later, after her husband had been arrested and everything had cleared up a little bit. She was very thankful. This was about 6 months ago and she sends flowers baked goods to the clinic like every month now. This upset me a lot. Not me but my uncle. He told me this probably 5 years ago when he was very drunk and I haven't heard anything about it before or after. I guess when he was around 7 or 8 some kid who lived on his street had gotten his dad's shotgun and was playing with it in the street with another kid. He pointed it at him and yelled, "Freeze!" The kid put his hands up jokingly and turned to walk away, but the kid pulled the trigger on him. He said there was a red mist hanging in the air. The kid's head was literally gone. No idea what happened after that though. Oh man. My dad said that someone on his little league football team accidentally did this to one of his friends. They were messing around with a hunting rifle and the kid got his head blown off. Just recently it happened again in my town. It really sucks that this sort of stuff happens. Loaded guns inside are very unsafe. I was driving to an out-of-state funeral in the early with my older sister. Early morning in late December in New England. As my sister and I drove on the nearly empty Route 95N, we came around a corner which was a little slick with ice, so we slowed down. Come to find around that corner was a huge wreck. A Jeep had rolled and smashed into the guardrail, and only a few cops were there. The young man, who was 16, had been thrown from the car about 20 feet, and a blood-soaked sheet covered some of the body. You could see his bloody socks and jeans. We slowed down just because of the initial shock. Then, we saw this guy, who we later learned was this kid's dad on the news, pulling his car over on the opposite side of the highway, and sprinting with this look of terror and anger and fear, towards the body. We had stopped the car at this point so he could run past, and the cop stopped him and he just broke down screaming. We couldn't hear him because the windows were closed, but it was even creepier seeing this go on silently. So we continue to drive, and then we see the kid's shoes in the middle of the road. Brand new green Nikes, sitting in the road a few feet from each other. We accidentally ran over one, and the thud sound just broke my heart. This kid was 16. Still bothers me to this day. When I was in grade 1, one of my friends was murdered just outside the school in the woods. A week or so later my friends and I were walking through them like the dumb little shoots we were, and found the knife still covered in blood. One of the guys picked it up and took it back to the school. Luckily it was a simple case and the guy was already arrested, or we could have messed up the evidence for the case. But needless to say, that was what put it in my mind that the murder actually happened, and to more careful. Was playing football at a local park about 6 years back now. I'm 17 now BTW, when the ball went a wall and ended up in a pond. A friend tried to go in and get the ball out, got tangled up in the reeds and such, drowned. None of us could do a thing. The ball continued to float there for about 2 weeks after he died, and I had to walk past that same pond daily to go to school. Seeing the ball floating there was and still is the creepiest thing ever. My friends and I used to climb onto the roof of my high school late at night because, well, it was fun. One night my best friend and I brought 2 girls, whom we were crushing on. onto the roof to show them what we thought was a harmless and exciting discovery. After some time exploring as a group, my friend and I thought it appropriate to go explore the rooftops alone with our respective crushes. In the distance I saw what seemed like a fitting spot to have a seat. Well, it turns out it wasn't so fitting because it was a skylight. I only remember up to this point. My friend describes what happened next as the most horrifying experience of his life. After about a few minutes he came looking for me as it turned eerily silent. He approached a shattered skylight and it clicked. We were down there. He yelled and yelled until I finally muttered back a weak "help, I can't move." Police and paramedics were called. He never got a response from the girl. I woke up 2 days later with a concussion, a few broken bones, and some minor internal bleeding. My crush was diagnosed dead on impact. I'm not sure if this is even appropriate in this thread, but frick it, I guess. I work in the glass industry and we see of incidents like this. One of the pieces of glass has to be laminated so you can't bust through. If you walk across one, you'll still go through the top piece though, which is freaking scary. We call it the half-inch heart attack. It happened when I got home from school one afternoon. I had gotten home early and no one else was there. My dog had just had puppies. My mother breeds King Charles Spaniels, and what I found was the most horrendous thing I've seen to this day. We had a parrot at the time who was a total C. Basically super territorial, and he decided to attack these puppies. I'm not going to go into the gory details, but there was blood and fur everywhere. Out of the 5 there were only 2 left and they had to be put down. The smell though, it was freaking awful and I'll never forget it. The poor mother dog. I lived through the war in Bosnia from 1992 to 1995. Found a dead student in the middle of campus while I was walking to a morning class. Her body was still warm when I checked her pulse. Called the paramedics on a campus phone. They tried for a long time to revive her, but to no avail. It was creepy in the sense that you are never really expecting to see a body on your way to class at 8 AM. This is exactly how an episode of Law and Order SVU started. Spotted a dead man floating in a river when I was 30. Called police from a park phone booth. A detective interviewed me. She was gone that afternoon. That's not cool. A few weeks ago a woman was repeatedly stabbed outside my window. I won't ever forget her screams and her rattled breathing when I went out to flag down the police. I feel guilty for not doing more than calling 911, but I am also angry because I heard the police interviewing a girl, asking if she heard anything and she had heard the screaming. She said yes but didn't call the police. How do you freaking not call the police? How horrible are you to not bother to try to help? I hope she feels guilty. The poor woman deserved better. And now she is dead and the guy hasn't been found yet. So wait. By she was gone that afternoon, do you mean that someone found her and someone came and recovered the body? Or do you mean that the murderer came back and moved her somewhere else? When I was 7 years old, my parents were going through a very tough time. They decided to split up for a while because my mom was going through a crazy partying phase. She got custody. I was too young to understand what was going on, but I hated my father. We're best friends now and my parents have been back together for years. My mom was just too young when they first got together and she had my sister. One night when my mother went out drinking with friends, she left me home with my 12-year-old sister. We lived in an extremely bad neighborhood apartment complex that was full of miscellaneous crime. I was playing Warlock on Sega Genesis when I started hearing yelling outside. We had a double glass door facing the porch area that connected the apartments. We got up to look out the window and saw a white police officer talking to a black man. The black man pulls out a bag of something and eats it. The cop instantly takes his baton and hits him across the face. It knocked the guy to the ground and the cop gets down and starts bashing his skull into the concrete. After a minute or so, the cop stops and calls in for an ambulance. He killed that man for swallowing a bag of an illicit substance. My sister was on the local news the next day explaining what happened, but no one believed us. Even though there was blood all over the concrete, the officer claimed he choked to death after swallowing the bag. It's one reason why I will never trust police officers that I don't know on a personal level. When I was younger I used to have really intense visual hallucinations. Some normal stuff, glowing orbs, floating hands, But the creepiest thing that I ever saw was my own dead body on the floor in front of me wearing the exact same clothes I was wearing at the time. This might be the caliber of the other stories here, but this freaked me out when I first saw it. So like 4 years ago when I was in high school, I used to exercise in the basement of my house, which is connected to the garage because my house is built into the side of a hill. Anyway, I'm exercising when I hear this loud clicking noise coming from the garage. I had no idea what it was. It was like 10 PM and everyone else was either asleep or in their bedroom on the other side of the house. I opened the door to the garage and I can't even comprehend what I was looking at. A bat had gotten its wing stuck to some fly tape and the clicking was its teeth against its bone. It was trying to bite off its arm. The clicking was so loud. I have lived in Juarez City for all my life, so I lived through what was probably the most hardest and harshest stage of Felipe Calderon's war on crime. For the time being, I have witnessed 2 carjacks. On one, a man got shot in the jaw for resisting. I have been inside of a store during a robbery and have had a gun put against my head. That was really freaking scary. I saw the guy get executed with what seemed hundreds of bullets fired from machine guns in the middle of a crowded street in the middle of the day. And, well, besides getting mugged twice, and the occasional bar fight that gets out of hand, I have seen a lot, and unfortunately I think pretty much anyone who's lived in Juarez has too. Coming back from spring break in Key West, Florida, the group I was traveling with had to stop in North Miami at 2 AM for gas. Keep in mind that we are all blazed out of our skulls for the year's story. We got off the interstate and stopped at some sketchy gas station. Some of the guys went in, the others went to the bathroom on the side of the building. While inside, I got this really weird, uncomfortable feeling. Everyone in the store was making eye contact, but not saying anything. Not a single word. You could hear a pin drop. I gave my friend ahead of me in line some money to pay for my food. I had to get out of that store. Too many creepy vibes. The second I walk out the door, a lady starts screaming bloody murder. A huge black guy with no shirt on was beating her through her car window. He was punching her right in the face, as hard as Mike Tyson. She eventually got her car in drive and started to take off. The crazy guy hung on and was dragged down the street for about 50 yards. He eventually pulled the door off its hinges and the lady drove off. So we are all standing there, watching this huge crazy guy walk back towards the gas station, covered in blood, carrying a car door on his shoulder. We all jumped in the truck and took off. About a mile down the road, 15 cop cars flew past us. No one said a word in the truck for the next hour or so. We were all trying to wrap our heads around what we had just seen. So I was one of the first class at UC Merced. Basically, they built a brand new campus in the middle of nowhere, so the only roads to the school were two-lane roads. The kinds of roads that are straight and flat for miles but have no street lights. Me and some friends were driving back to campus late one night after getting some fast food and saw another car, probably about 2 miles away, coming towards us with their lights on. When the cars saw our lights, they naturally turned their lights back to normal. I wish they never did this. Our 2 cars are getting closer and closer together. As the car coming towards us is about 10 feet away, both cars are traveling approx 50 miles per hour. Mind you, I see the shadow of a figure directly in front of their car, and in a split second we hear this thickening crunch. It happened so fast that you are just in shock. I pull over and we find out the other car full of college kids has just hit some guy who was walking down a pitch black highway at 50 miles per hour. I was at work just over 3 years ago. While it was a slow day, we still have a few minor things we can do to stay busy on our slower days, and this was most certainly slow until now. I was walking around our parking lot to make sure nothing was suspicious. I work at an airport. It's really not uncommon for people to park like buttholes and to leave their car for an extended period of time. While walking about the parking lot, I noticed a PT Cruiser kind of parked funny and all a mess, and when I looked inside through the window I saw what appeared to be hair under a blanket. I initially thought it to be a dog but found out it was an older woman who had committed suicide. She had been there for 4 months and only her hair, nails and some skin remained intact. The proper authorities were contacted, but BC of the company I work for, I was chosen to remain on scene and watch her being pulled out scoop by scoop and spew onto the ground. When I was less than 10, my police officer father had picked me up from school and was dropping me off at my grandparents' while he was on duty. There was a call to a park near where we were. Every time we've talked about this, he says he knew he shouldn't have taken me but also knew he didn't have a choice. We pull up to this park in his squad car next to another couple of cops with their guns drawn pointed towards a man sitting on a park bench under a tree facing away from us. My dad gets out and tells me to stay in the car. From my angle, I had no idea why they're here for this guy. The negotiator showed up and tried talking to this guy for a few minutes but to no prevail. He pulled the trigger on the double-barrel shotgun he had between his legs, blew his head completely off. I didn't scream, didn't cry, just kinda stared shocked. The part that sticks in my mind was what fell from the tree, the brains and blood. My dad took the rest of the day off, took me to my favorite place to eat and talked to me about what all his job entailed. TLDR. At 10, I watched a guy blows his head off with a shotgun in a park. This is the goodest flyboy. He will bring you 10 years of happiness in exchange for a like on this video. Like and subscribe, you magnificent person.